Hey everyone, you're listening to Fantasy Uptick. I'm Jeremiah Blue, and today we're going to be talking about undervalued players. As you can tell, I'm not at my house or my normal recording area. I'm in Texas due to a family emergency. That's why I haven't recorded in the last few days. But I'm back now, and we're going to be going on a road trip back to Jersey. So in a few days I'll be there, and as you all know, opening day is within a few hours. So I just wanted to go over some undervalued players before that happens. So with that, let's get into it. So I recently just did a sleeper video, but this was going to be more of an undervalued. And undervalued is very close to sleepers, except I'm going to be talking about players that I don't actually consider sleepers. I consider guys that are just going lower in their ADP than they need to be going, and guys that you might want to either target via your draft, which I know a lot of people have already done their draft, but you could also target these guys via trade based off of what their value is currently, or some of these guys might actually be on the waiver wire for you to go get. So first guy I want to talk about is Freddie Freeman. He recently had the COVID thing, but he's an elite first baseman. And as I'm sure you've heard a couple of times, that the first basemen just aren't as elite as they normally are in year to year. And the difference between Freddie Freeman and Cody Bellinger is not that big a deal. So Cody Bellinger's going obviously in the top 5, top 4 typically. And then you got Freddie Freeman, who's going, at this point, I saw him in my last draft, which I just recently did like 3 days ago, going in round 3 based on this whole COVID thing. The thing is, he's back from COVID, and I don't think people realize that he's probably going to be just fine. And as I've talked in other videos, I'm actually targeting guys that have had COVID and are now coming back based on the fact that I think it's going to be less likely that they get COVID moving forward. It's a short season, and COVID's such a scary thing when it comes to how long people are going to be out. Obviously, these are professional athletes. Most of these athletes are going to be fine if they get COVID, but they are going to be off my fantasy baseball team for about 2 weeks. So Freddie Freeman's back. He did have a bad case of the COVID, but again, he's back, and I don't think he's going to end up getting it for the rest of the baseball season. So that's another reason I like Freddie Freeman. But he could easily be the best first baseman in baseball this year. I think the difference between him and Cody Bellinger is smaller than the difference between Freddie Freeman and the rest of the pack. So, again, I like Freddie Freeman, especially the fact that he's going super late. If you see him in the 3rd round, don't hesitate to get him. The next guy I want to talk about is Willson Strairs, which the fact of the matter is he's basically the last of the elite catchers. So I typically like to get the last of the elite. He could end up being the best catcher in baseball this year, and he's going essentially is your last opportunity to get an elite catcher. And when we're talking about like 10-team leagues, I think getting an elite catcher is worth it because every roster is stacked, but there's only about 4 or 5 good catchers. So again, getting a good catcher, the smaller your league is, the more important it is, in my opinion, to get a good catcher because you're going to have elite players at all your other positions, right? So if you're in a 12, 14-team league, well, in those kind of leagues, obviously you're going to have a lot of positions that aren't elite, so you can wait on your catcher. But when you're in a 10-team league or an 8-team league, every single position is elite unless you wait on catcher, and then you're going to have a real disadvantage at catcher. So Willson Contreras, he actually fell to me in a 12-team league, and I just took him, and I feel great about it. Now I'm going to have a solid catcher the rest of the year. I could have the number 1 catcher, and I didn't have to waste a high draft pick on him based on the fact that he's the last of the elite catchers. This is one of those guys that I just like based on the fact that I only like about 4 or 5 of these guys, and he's the guy that falls light. If I miss out on Contreras, I'm typically just waiting until the very end. As I talk to my sleeper show, I'm going after Francisco Mejia, right? All right, so the next one is shortstop, and a lot of people have talked about how elite the shortstop position is based on how it typically is, like how deep the position is. The problem is once that deepness ends, and it goes about 21, 22 deep at solid shortstops, it falls off an absolute cliff, right? So the guys that I'm kind of targeting are the guys that fall after that elite, because unless you draft a shortstop in the first 5 rounds, there's about 16 of them that go in that range. And when you're talking about that, you're talking about guys that are putting them at utility. You're talking about guys that are putting them at center infield. You might end up coming out of the 6th round and not have a guy that you really want, right? So the guys that I'd be targeting is Carlos Correa, which I think is one of those post-hype sleepers. Again, this is a guy that everybody thought was going to be amazing. He was going in the 2nd round a couple of years ago, and all of a sudden he gets banged up. He deals with injury. He's still super young, and he could be one of those guys, and that's exactly what a post-high sleeper is, the guy that everybody thought was going to be good, everybody had high hopes for, and then all of a sudden he goes through a bunch of injuries, and people just kind of forget about him. He starts to fall down your draft, right? This is a guy that actually me and the guy who runs the Instagram, Brandon Hickle, argued with because he likes Tim Anderson, which Anderson was one of those guys that basically had one good year. His BABIP was through the roof. He doesn't get on base very much. It's more like his batting average and his on-base percentage are not. There's not a big gap there. I just don't trust guys like that, especially in a season like this where essentially just 1 or 2 bad weeks could really mess your whole season up. So a guy that can get on base, that, you know, can take walks, a guy that has a lot of that power, who's been dealing with injuries, whose upside is like through the roof. Again, this is a guy that at this point would just be awesome for you. And he brings that power, which again, power you can find at every position. But at shortstop, this is going to be great. And he could end up being your backup shortstop. So if you end up drafting a shortstop in the first or second round, you still want to get another shortstop because like the way I rotate is I essentially want 2 at each position, especially this year when you got all these injuries. You want to have those guys on the bench that you can either play at the utility spot or the shortstop position, whereas if you wait too long at the shortstop, you're going to end up with one of the pitchers any day that the shortstop sits, you're essentially just having a blank spot at shortstop, right? So the other guy I want to talk about, the same position, shortstop, is Jorge Polanco. And Jorge Polanco is, in my opinion, is just basically the last good option at shortstop. So if you see him and he's rising up that chart in the ADP as the guy who's about to go next, he's basically your last good option. I don't mind Elvis Andrus, but I think there's a significant difference between Jorge Polanco and Elvis Andrus. That's why I like Jorge Polanco. Just based off his ADP, I think he's undervalued. Correa, I think, is undervalued based on ADP. Wilson Contreras, I just love him because I think if you want a good catcher this year, he's your best option because of the spot he's going in ADP is the last of the great catchers. And then Freddie Freeman, he's being dropped basically due to COVID, right? So those are my top 4 bats. Those are the bats I wanted to talk about today. And now I'll get into pitching, right? So one of the guys that I keep wanting to bring up, and I just always have somebody better that I want to talk about, but Mitch Keller. And I know Mitch Keller is going to scare a lot of people away because of his 7.13 ERA and his 1.83 whip in 48 innings, which is absolutely terrible. I get it. I understand. And that's why he's going as late as he's going. But this guy was great in the minors, right? And his 65 strikeouts in those 48 innings was a 12.19 K per 9, which is super elite. And then his BABIP last year was insane because essentially the batters that were playing against them had a .475 BABIP, which you can't imagine is going to maintain. And his strand rate was 59.6, right? So the averages in BABIP is .300. So again, that's 175% lower. Just if he gets down to average, that's not even suggesting if he had a good year in BABIP, right? And in the strand rate, which is almost 100% luck, right, is 72%, whereas last year for him it was 59.6%. And again, if he can just come down to average on some of those things, his K per 9 rate, his swinging strike rate is insane. So this is one of those guys that I just absolutely love. I have him on almost every single fantasy league that I'm in this year, just based on the fact that I kind of reached for him because I really liked him. Like if we look at his slider, and he's got an elite pitch, and that's one thing I always kind of look at when I'm talking about like pitchers, is do they have an elite pitch that's going to put them on that level of being absolutely amazing, right? And if you look at the slider, he had a 26.8% swinging strike rate on it, right? The league average in swinging strike rate is 9.5%. So his slider was insane. It's in the same line as like Justin Verlander, who obviously everybody knows finished in the top 1 or 2, depending on what your league scoring is last season. So again, Mitch Keller is a guy who could really blow up for you this year. One of those guys that you want to, and he's going super late in draft. So again, go after this guy. And I know he plays for Pittsburgh, so you're not going to get a lot of wins there. But they got a new pitching staff coach, so that could change a lot of things. And you know, Pittsburgh has had a history of having like really bad pitching, not doing enough with it. So the fact that they made a change there just gives me hope, because not that I know anything about the new guy, but I do know that the old one was just awful. So that, you know, in itself is a positive, right? Then we go to Ross Stripling, who essentially has already came out in the news that he's going to start the second game. This is a good guy who's going pretty late, who's got talent. He's always been good. He's just never been the starter. And I think he's going to hold on to that 5th starting spot on the Dodgers. Obviously, you're going to get a lot of wins. He is already a talented pitcher, and he's got a lot of help from the batting side of it. So again, Ross Stripling, just a guy that's only late because a lot of the news just came out later. Now, when you're doing your live draft, I had to reach for him a little bit because I kind of knew that somebody in my league was going to know about him. So, again, he's just down there. If you kind of get lost in what you're doing, go ahead and reach down there, grab Ross Stripling. He's going to give you some good stuff going forward this year. A solid start that you put in your lineup. And honestly, this is one of those years where pitching is going to be the hardest position group to maintain elite status throughout this season, I believe. And then you got Kenta Maeda, which I don't actually know why he's so low, but he's been good basically his whole career. He goes to the Twins, he's got a great schedule, and he's just falling backward. I can't explain it. This guy he's better than where he's being drafted. So again, keep an eye out for Kenta Maeda. Again, the Twins schedule is something that I just absolutely love this year. Another reason why I love Polanco, which was what I was talking about earlier. I mean, again, Polanco, last good option at shortstop. He's in his prime. Great schedule because the Twins have a great schedule, and he's dealt with ankle injuries in the past. Again, I like guys that are coming off injuries because that's why they're falling so late in the draft, because of the injury history. As we're talking about Kenta Maeda, the Twins are just going to dominate that division. That division's garbage, and this year they're basically playing within their division a lot more percentage-wise than they would in a normal season because of the shortened season process, right? And then we get to closers. Now, closers is one of those things that you definitely want to get this year. You don't necessarily have to waste high draft picks, but you want to make sure that you come out of your draft with closers. Otherwise, you're going to be just bidding ridiculously for any closer that comes out, right? So if you're going into your closer thing on Thursday, you should look at Wang Yong Kim. I think that's it. Wang Yong Kim. He's the St. Louis closer, right? And he's just a late flyer, and that's because he's been essentially named the closer for the job. I don't know how long he's going to hang on to the job, but he's going to be the closer for a good roster, at least earlier in your season. And earlier in the season is basically half the season because the season's so short this year, right? I like Ian Kennedy this year because there's literally no chance he loses the job, in my opinion. I think he's just so much better for a closer job as anybody else. He's going super late. Yes, he plays for a bad team, but there's still going to be closer chances. And last year, the second half of the year, he was one of the best closers in baseball. So again, this is one of those guys that you're gonna be able to start every week. He's gonna get you saves. He's gonna feel that need for you at closer, and you don't have to waste a high draft pick on him. And then Craig Kimball is a guy that I just believe is being undervalued. Basically, he had a long layoff last season, and by the time he got signed by the Cubs, he wasn't in prime condition. He had a bad 20 innings or so, but the track record on this guy is just, he's going to be a Hall of Famer type player. So again, I think that this year he's on the Cubs. The Cubs are going to win a lot of games, and Craig Kimball's not losing his closer job. So this is a guy that's going fairly late based off of what his upside is, which is his upside is being the number 1, 2, 3 closer in baseball. So again, I love Craig Kimball at this spot. And so those are my guys that I think are being severely undervalued. I'll go through it one more time. Freddie Freeman, and again, this has to do with the COVID thing. And the big difference is I think Freddie Freeman could easily be the number 1 first baseman in baseball. And there's a big gap between him and the number 3. I'm not a big Pete Alonso guy. So if you're a big Pete Alonso guy, then there's definitely a big gap between Freddie Freeman and the number 4 guy at the first base spot. Wilson Contreras being the last catcher. I don't want to waste a high pick on catcher, but if I want an elite catcher, I don't have to waste a high pick to get Wilson Contreras, and he still gives me that elite catcher value. Shortstop, we got Carlos Correa, who's a post-high sleeper. He dealt with injuries. That's a reason why he's falling as far as he is. He's got the skills to have a career year. Last year, he played through injury, and I think that maybe had a lot to do with everything. The same thing kind of went with Jorge Polanco. Even though he had a career year last year, people forget that he had ankle injuries all through the year, so he didn't steal as many bases, which I think he could steal more bases this season because, and he wasn't like an elite base stealer, but he did steal more bases in the 2 seasons prior to that, and he's still in the prime of his career. He's going to be 26 years old. It's not like he's over the hill or anything like that. And again, he's probably getting better. He's in the prime of his career. Great schedule, being that he plays for the Twins. We go back to Mitch Keller. Again, I think the Pittsburgh Pirates made a lot of adjustments just from the coaching standpoint there. But again, all the peripherals are elite, and he had a lot of bad luck last year. I think this is a guy that could end up being a real breakout this year. Probably my favorite breakout from a pitcher standpoint this season. Ross Stripling, even if he doesn't maintain the job all year long, which I think he will, as the 5th starter on LA Dodgers, just being a starter on the LA Dodgers is going to be a huge win for him, especially since Again, all his peripherals are pretty good. His ERA, his whip is always really low. All his other numbers are really good for a guy that's being drafted at his spot. Kenta Maeda, I honestly have no idea why he's going so late, but he's got the twin schedule. He's always been a pretty good pitcher. So, again, a guy that I really liked drafting if he falls to you. And then closers, we go for Hall of Famer Craig Kimball, or future Hall of Famer Craig Kimball, who's going, in the middle of the pack of closers, and he plays for the Cubs, a great team. Again, he's gonna be one of the elite closers this year, and he's safe because he's not going to lose his job. He's not going to get traded because Cubs are going to be in it. So again, one of the solid closers. Ian Kennedy, I like him because he's going so late. Even though he plays for a bad team, his closer job is safe. The only chance that Ian Kennedy has of losing the closer job is if he gets traded at the trade deadline, and we'll see how that plays out this year. I almost think that not a lot of people are going to be traded this year based on not a lot of people are going to be moved based on the fact that I feel like a lot of people are going to be in it towards the end of the year. And then lastly, Wang Yong Kim, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing that incorrectly, and I don't know a lot about this guy. I just know he's been named the closer for St. Louis, and if you're doing a draft on Thursday, you should definitely draft this guy as a late flyer, or keep it in mind that he's going to be the starting closer for St. Louis Cardinals early in the season. And if you've already drafted, there's a chance that he's just sitting out on the waiver wire, so go get him. Anyways, that's it for today's show. Let me know in the comments what you think about my undervalued players. I know me and the guy who runs our fantasy football Instagram had a disagreement about Carlos Correa and Tim Anderson. Let us know in the comments what you think about that. That's actually our first beer bet of the year. And remember to hit a like and subscribe. Till next time, see ya!